Thank you, everybody. Uh, Happy to be back after 2 days gap. Yesterday we had a wonderful evening, Dastan Goi, a cultural evening with songs and storytelling about freedom struggle, particularly the Kakori conspiracy case, and all the martyrs uh, therein. So today we are back. Today we are going to look at understanding violence. What does, how does violence operate in this? Uh, huh. So what is the main purpose of violence? You must understand that what is basically violence can be looked at from many angles. Now, violence is in the heads of the individuals. It's not in the biceps and triceps of, or it's not about strength. It's aggression. It's when you think that I is above we, the self, and my self-interests are above any other morals or ethics of good behavior. I must get my interests, whatever I'm interested in. I'm above everybody. The basic philosophy, one of the philosophy of violence is me above anybody else. So it's like what we call in Hindi, जिसकी लाठी उसकी भैंस. So you believe in strong arm tactics to control everything. Violence is also in collective imagination and in forms of ideologies of dominance over others. So those ideologies of dominance over some social group or the other can be in the form of caste, race, just as we saw in US, race, white race over the others, or what we see in Israel, Jews over Arabs, that Arabs are intruders into this territory. Jews were promised this land and this land belongs to us and we take by force. So that's collective imagination or collective ideologies of dominance. It's either ethnic, racial, caste, communal, gender, or these kind of ideologies of dominance over social group. And violence is seen in aggression and aggressive behavior, forcing of one's will on the others. Now, what does violence do? Violence basically makes other people behave according to your will. According, other people comply to whatever are your interests or collective group's interests. For example, nationalism would want everybody to comply to a particular behavior or get out of the country. Caste would make everybody comply to the caste hierarchical behavior. You know, everybody in their place. You have to do your traditional occupation uh, that according to the caste ideology you are placed in. Okay, and this compliance in one's self-interest or collective group's interest or to one's liking is by use of force or coercion, physical force or threat of force, or of causing uh, physical injury or destruction of property or physical injury or reputation of another person in whom this person or this collective group is interested. So this essentially is how violence works, that you cause physical injury, you threaten physical injury, or destruction of property, or destruction of reputation of somebody in whom this person is interested. All right. So then that is called violence. That's how violence operates. That you threaten someone, and if that person is not able to, or gets afraid of this physical injury, or is not able to bear this physical injury, rest all will comply. So it basically works uh, by instilling fear of physical injury, or destruction of property, or destruction of reputation. Property, injury, or reputation of oneself or another person whom one is interested. Okay, this is how violence is operative. Now, the essence of violence is to dominate over others, to assert one's control over others, uh, control behavior or thoughts of others, mind of others or behavior of others. Basically, control that. And why do you want to control? So that you take advantage or benefit from the labor, body, and body includes sexual assault. When you control somebody's body, it includes sexually exploiting that body. So labor, body, mind, or property of that person or group of person, and spirit of the collective spirit, the collective will of that person. That's how violence operates. And this is the purpose for which violence is often employed. Now, violence can be, different spheres. Domestic sphere, which is essentially against women, and to control mind, body, labor of the woman in the house. So it's either in domestic sphere or crime or social sphere. It also operates in economic violence and political violence, when you want to exploit somebody's labor, benefit out of it, or grab somebody's what is economically due to that person or that collective or that social group. Then it's called economic violence, when you deprive them of economic opportunities or economic benefits that they are otherwise entitled to. That operates as economic violence, and at times it is political violence. When you rig elections, when you, by unfair means, want to politically dominate over others, establish your political authority over somebody else, then it operates as political violence. So, yeah. Now, we saw last time, I'll just very briefly repeat here, and once again I'll repeat. Uh, Violence is more than just physical aggression or physical injury or physical harm. It's about structures and systems. Uh, you can kill by a gun, or you can kill somebody by depriving of food economically. So when you loot Africa's, the global system, the capitalist system, or international capital loots the raw material of Africa, mineral resources and natural resources of Africa, of African continent, and deprives and keeps them poor. Many people are dying because of poverty, because they don't get their due share, because they cannot control their natural resources, oil or mining or etc. etc. And you exploit their very, very cheap labor. Then what you are doing is that is also violence because there are so many hunger deaths in India as well as in the world. We see growing inequalities. All right. So if there are global structures and systems, financial systems that deprive people of basic needs and leads to deaths, what is the difference between killing by gun and killing them by depriving? So structures and systems can also be violent. We had seen this earlier. I'm slightly repeating it once again. So, casteism and patriarchy are also such violent structures because they deprive people of opportunities, benefits, or deprive them of growth up to their full human potential. Okay, so systems and they also can be violent. Okay, now we can have attitudes and behaviors that are violent. The moment you think you are superior over others because of your culture, because of your strength, or because of uh, race or community, caste, religion, and you behave according to your belief that you are superior, or a collective behaves that they are superior, those attitudes are violent and your behavior will also be violent. For example, there are many examples, many examples. Hitler believed that Aryan race is superior and should rule the world. But that was not only violent attitude, it also contributed to physical violence because it led the world into a world war. And it led Hitler's ideology to cause all kind of uh, physical violence upon Jews, genocide as we know, the final solution. We saw this, we see this collective violence time and again, whether it's mob lynching in name of cow, whether it's genocide, 2002 Gujarat, 1984 anti-Sikh violence in Delhi and other cities in the country. Uh, Basically, first it begins from those attitudes, those ideologies that we are superior and others are inferior, or you have superior rights and others have inferior rights. Etc. etc. Okay, so you have behaviors and okay. Now, violent behaviors and war are in most cases only a small part of conflict. Physical violence and war is only a small part of conflict. Although it appears very, to you and me, it appears as a basic problem or basic conflict. Otherwise, it doesn't appear as conflict. But there is more than physical violence, there is more than war. It's these violent structures that I was talking of, global capital, globalization, rising inequalities, economic exploitation. These are all pervasive. They are violent structures that occurs daily in our life. Every day it occurs and millions of people suffer that violence, but it is hardly talked about and not seen, hardly visible. So these violent attitudes, violent contributes to violent behavior, but we don't see these violent attitudes. The profiteering, the conflict entrepreneurs, they benefit out of this conflict and they operate in our daily life. For example, those who propound the theories or ideologies of supremacy of one social group over others, that we are superior and others should comply. to uh, our norms or behave according to what we desire. Those entrepreneurs are the ones who benefit from these conflicts, and they operate daily, not always uh, in visible form. They don't cause physical violence daily, but they operate daily. For example, those who the arms dealers. Now, if you go to CIPRA website, Stockholm Institute for Peace and Peace Research and Arms, CIPRA, SIPRA. Every year they publish trillions of dollars of arms deals. Now these conflict entrepreneurs, uh, those who are arms dealers, those who manufacture these arms, would want to sell more and more and more. And they can sell more if there is more and more violence in the world, more and more wars in the world, so that governments buy their arms, countries buy their arms. Proliferation of small arms and explosives that we see, the terrorists operating. There are arms dealers who sell their weapons to these terrorists. So terrorists benefit. Their ideologies of dominance benefit, and these arms dealers also benefit. I don't have time, otherwise I would have narrated a very interesting experiment that we did in Kandhamal. When there was violence, I visited after Kandhamal, after communal conflict, and talked to people, both those who were in conflict, and asked them who benefited from this conflict. And after a lot of discussion, people came up, not Christians, not non-Christian tribals, not Dalits, not tribals, not ordinary Dalits, not ordinary. They were involved. They got killed, or they were involved in violence, in killing. The beneficiaries were the corrupt bureaucracy, the police, the arms dealers, the leaders of these mobs who had political objectives, etc., etc. Very interesting. They were all conflict entrepreneurs. So violence is more than, uh, and we must keep a watch on these conflict entrepreneurs. Unless we keep a watch on these conflict entrepreneurs, we'll never be able to understand violence. Understanding violence is very important because it points to vital entry points of conflict transformation in both context and attitude of a situation. Now, violence by state is often state violates or uses violence on protesting people or on peaceful demonstrators, and often those are human rights violations. We see this in Kashmir. We see this in Northeast. We see this in the way police deals with communal violence or collective violence or tortures. How they conduct investigations of crimes through tortures and through beating. Recently, we saw in Tamil Nadu father and son being killed being tortured to death. Whole night they were beaten and clubbed to death by police, allegedly by two police officers. So these are often, we categorize this violence by state when it is on civilians or on citizens as human rights violation. But often we are asked to say, but what about terrorist killing innocent citizens? Isn't that human rights? We are told, no, that is not human rights. Human rights is when state inflicts illegal violence or disproportionate violence on its citizenry. Illegal or disproportionate violence in order to tame them or for whatever reason. When non-state actors like terrorists or say mob lynchers or those who believe in violent ideologies, communal ideologies or racist ideologies or patriarchies or casteist ideologies, when they inflict violence on citizens, then at best it is crimes or genocide to be punished by state. Those non-state actors who inflict violence are supposed to be brought to justice by state. But often state, if the state is compliant, is collaborating with non-state actors, which we often see the state does, that's when uh, uh, large-scale violence can be uh, is practiced on peaceful and innocent citizens, particularly on the marginalized section, weaker sections, and minorities. Now, collective violence is social, economic, and political. This is the diagram that we can see about violence. ABC triangle, A for attitudes, C for context, and B for behavior. ABC triangle. Now, often what we do not realize that attitudes or feelings or values, violent attitudes contribute or are root cause of violent behavior. That attitudes are often less visible violence. The visible violence is just about 1/10 of violence that we see. 90% of violence that takes place in society, we do not see in daily. So attitudes like patriarchal or sexist attitudes, attitudes of intolerance, mistrust, racism, or prejudices against a community. You are anti-national. Uh, you are not loyal to this country. Uh, you are terrorist. You are anti-national. So on and so forth. Or there are lots of anti-social elements in one particular community. So on and so forth. These these kind of attitude, or you are a weaker section in case of gender attitudes, or women are fit to be only at home. These are violent attitudes, which then contribute towards violent behavior towards women, marginalized sections like Dalits, tribals, minorities, OBCs, or those who are powerless or less powerful compared to those who are in power. So there's also structural violence that we see. We already saw uh, discrimination in education or livelihood or in health facilities. Globalization is a violent structure. Any structure that denies equality, rights, liberties, or believes in segregation or apartheid structures, uh, any law that structurally discriminates against others, except that which are meant for affirmative action for those who are weaker sections, except those discriminatory policies, affirmative actions, uh, rest all discrimination or all structures that discriminate on basis of gender, caste, community, race, ethnicity, or create inequalities or enable a tiny section of elite to loot the populace, to loot the cheap labor, raw material, environment, and personally profit and benefit. These are violent structures. They operate daily in our lives, and we don't realize, we don't see that as violence. These are less visible violence, but more pervasive and more harmful. And this triangle tells us that violent attitudes, feelings, and values, structures that are violent, systems that are violent, are the context in which behavioral violence takes place. So we can call this as an ABC triangle: attitude, context, contributing to or leading to behavioral violence. So ABC. Okay, we can call this as ABC violence. We already saw. I'll just read it, read this, and no more explanation. Uh, Structural violence is silent. It is everywhere, and if its source are hard to verify, its results are readily visible, namely poverty, marginalization, uh, growing inequality. Violence consists of, we already saw this in previous session also, violence consists of actions, words, attitudes, structures, or systems that cause physical, psychological, social, or environmental damage and or prevent people from reaching their full human potential. I think we should remember this definition and understand, because it explains violence 360 degrees. Okay. Now, uh, change can be brought about by violent means as well as by non-violent means. Let us quickly go through the change that were brought about by violent means. There are many who believe that peace can be established in certain cases only through violence. Uh, there are others who believe that there is no situation in which lasting peace can be established through inner conflict, through violent means. Let us see uh, where peace was established by use of violence. For example, in Second World War or in Darfur, Sudan, where ethnic genocide was being practiced. Is the international community had to send a UN peacekeeping force to establish peace there, because the state was aligning with violent groups and violent nationalist ideologies to establish its hegemony over the poor and the marginalized, the minorities, both in Second World War, in Darfur, and in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Or Palestine liberation struggle was violent at one point of time, and Hamas still believes that their movement has to be violent movement, because we cannot win a war non-violently. We won't be able to defeat Israel that is armed to the teeth. Military solutions often may establish temporary peace, but are not lasting. Uh, Sudanese civil war lasted between South Sudan and Sudan. There was a civil war that lasted for half a century, 50 years. Uh, there was ongoing war, and then UN forces had to intervene. and establish peace. So there are examples of peace established through war and violence. But Pai and Casper studied 16 forced regime changes in 20th century. Only four of them, Germany, Japan, Grenada, and Panama, are the countries where democracy lasted for 10 years or more after the US troops were withdrawn, after establishing the so-called peace through violent means. So it shows that violence, if it establishes peace temporarily, it is not long lasting. Okay. And Dobbins studied six major nation building operations: Somalia, Haiti, were clear failures, while Bosnia and Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq remain unresolved. So that's peace established by violence and war. Those who wage war in name of establishing peace or fighting the so-called terrorism or war against terrorism. It is they themselves may uh, become a violent and unjust war. There are also examples of non-violent methods of bringing about change and establishing lasting peace. Indian independence is one such example. But Dalai Lama's struggle, non-violent struggle in Tibet to liberate Tibet has been one long-lasting, uh, uh, which has not yet won. Some people would say not yet won. I would say it's victory already because you have kept a huge section of Buddhists as peaceful. They fight that violent authoritarian China to their non to keep a large section of population as non-violent in itself is a very ardent task. And I would say if it has succeeded in keeping them non-violent, this itself is part of the victory. Of course, one has to liberate Tibet as well and see that uh, Buddhists and Tibetans get their due, get their autonomy or their freedom or their fair deal, which is acceptable to them as well. Now, non-violence need not be just passive. There can be active non-violence. Uh, and active non-violence seeks to make it costly to sustain undesirable situation. We made uh, costly for Britishers to continue to rule through our non-violent struggle, to dominate over India, to colonize India. We made it more and more costly by awakening not only humanity amongst Indians, but also appealing to humanity of one who is dominating over you, one who seeks to colonize over you, or one who is inflicting violence on you. So, how long that person and to what extent? Yesterday, in our session, we once again visited this song, which was composed by revolutionaries. सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे दिल में है, देखना है जोर कितना बाजुए कातिल में है. So when we talk of violence, uh, and in few slides we will finish. This is the last point that I'm trying to make. Power is central in all conflict. Who uses power and for what end? It is vital problem. Who is more powerful? And power flows through various authorities that we will see in subsequent slides. We believe power is only political power or through authority. That is one source of power. But power flows from one group to another, and it is so central to conflict. because all parties in the conflict try to gain power of some sorts or use power to establish peace or end conflict or further the conflict. It may be power of authority, what we call as political power, or it may be other powers. There are many, many forms of powers. So conflicts often center on search for more of it, that is more of power, or fear losing power. Often people in conflict assume that they do not have power to bring about change. And we will see that people also have power. We'll see in the subsequent slides. Power has number of meanings: force, legitimacy, authority, or ability to coerce. Look at this structure. The peasants, workers, toiling people pulling this cart of power, which is based on the traders that are one layer above, or entrepreneurs, or um, the industrialists, or the army, the elite, the army over them, and the state sitting over that and ruling. Uh, Often we don't see the toiling people pulling this cart, this chariot of power. It is their power that pulls. If they stop pulling this chariot, that is a power that we must realize. And that is the power that peaceful resolution of conflict through non-violence seems to awaken, asking the toiling people that stop pulling this chariot. Where it is your pulling of this chariot that advances and supports or helps concentration of authority in certain individuals. Sources of power: money, of course, is power. Relationship, you get things done through relationship. Uh, since I think I've taken more time than I was thinking about, and we should leave some time for questions and answers. I'll quickly read and leave it for you that what are these sources of power. I'll quickly go through this list. Credibility. Some people have power through their credibility. They can get things done. They can make others do things because of their credibility. All right. Some people have access to resources. If you have access to bank finance, overnight you can start industries and uh, benefit. So, or access to say raw materials or cheap raw materials or natural resources or resources of any kind. Some are privileged or some are empowered by tradition, men by patriarchal traditions, cultural traditions, upper caste by casteist tradition. Some have power of morality. Some have skills, and skills also is power or expertise. And your skill may be hunted at times or looked for, and you can take advantage of the skills that you have for personal gains or for social gains. Information is power, they say. If you have advanced information of something, you can quickly benefit from that information and you become more powerful. Authority, that is posts, positions. Legitimacy, more like credibility. Experience, if you have experience, it can make you powerful. Or it can mean networks sometimes empower you. Certain structures empower you. Charisma, location, where are you located? Which region? Urban people can take more, have more opportunities than rural people. People of one region may have, or social location. Where are you located in society? Your competence, communication, knowledge, partnership, systems, sustainability, exchange, visits, security. If you are secure, you are more powerful. If you have lack of feeling of security, you are more vulnerable. History is sought to empower a certain section. and your reinterpretation of history, personal qualities. There are three forms of power. Hard power, that is physical force, when you dominate somebody or when you are in a position to command somebody. Soft power or force, hard power is when you are able to force your will on others through physical injury or destruction of property, ability to destruct property or threats that we saw in previous slides. That is hard power. Soft power is when you are persuasive. Some people have, can encourage, persuade, inspire people. They have legitimacy. When yoga, they say, is soft power through which India wants to win over the world. Sports or ability to play. You may be a very popular actor. Cultural power is soft power. You can persuade people to see your point of view and to agree to you, to get compliance, uh, to be able to make people do things you like through your spatial abilities. That's soft power. Culture, arts is considered to be soft power. And the most exploited and marginalized has the third form of power, that is veto power, this ability to say no. Often people do not realize that, when a worker strikes in a factory, it is that worker's veto power. I am not party to your exploitation of me and my labor. Your ability to say no or your power to say no, most marginalized also has that veto power, and that veto power we have to arouse when we organize to set things right. Uh, Two types of soft power: exchange power and integrative power. When you compromise or you are able to bargain and reach a compromise, that's exchange power. And when you are able to solve the problem in its all entirety to the satisfaction, a win-win solution, that's called integrative power. I'll end here. Thank you for patiently listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irfan sir. If there are any questions, request participants either to raise their hand or simply text the question in the chat box. Thank you.
Yeah, Mushtaq.
Good evening, sir. As usual, it was very nice presentation. Just one observation and a question. The observation is that regarding the non-violent form of resistance or the non-violent means of
Yes.
going for a campaign or for a definite purpose, it again needs a lot of training, like for being in a violence, opting for violent means of option. So for non-violence also we need a lot of training. We need ideological training. We need that training as Mahatma Gandhi used to impart through Satyagraha and other such means. So at present I feel that we lack that kind of understanding of this non-violent kind of training, because it again needs a...
I agree. Yeah, please go on. I think he may have got disconnected. But I agree with him. Yes. Meanwhile, others can, till he can come back, somebody else can.
I think he can. I have asked him to unmute.
Yeah. So there is one observation that we also need a lot of ideological training, as well as training for going for non-violent kind of campaigns and resistance. And in Kashmir also we witness that we have very less models of non-violence. That's why most of the youth are opting for a violent means of resistance. The question, this was the observation. The question is that in case of this non-violence being quite productive, like we always quote Mahatma Gandhi's example, but would Mahatma Gandhi's satyagrah and his form of non-violent civil resistance be possible in a place like Germany under Hitler or in Italy under Mussolini? So would that model be applicable there? That's my question, because this question again is raised.
Armed conflict is or armed method to bring about change may be an option for equally strong or
most of the conflicts are either stemmed from psychological issues, then why do we forget that aspect? That's a question from Ragini. We can't listen. You're muted.
Yeah, I agree. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No, I agree. Perhaps I might have missed that. But psychological, violence are, which includes psychological violence as well, and those dimensions also are taken into account, and one has to take into account. Psychological dimension comes more when more into picture in interpersonal violence, whether it's when it's domestic violence or in situations where a person wants to inflict injury on oneself, suicide or cause harm to oneself, etc., etc. So it plays more of a role in interpersonal sphere of violence, and psychological in collective sphere also it can. Sudhir Kakkar and all others explain or give psychological reasons for why individuals become part of a violent mob. And it's very interesting observations and study. But I think it will take a lot of time to go into all those aspects. But yes, psychological aspects are also one of the aspects of violence. Is there anybody else? Yeah, Milind Vani wants to ask.
Okay, just a minute.
Yeah,
Milind.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear.
Yeah, so I wanted to know, maybe I missed it because I had to get up for a while. Do you think violence in some cases as a form of struggle against oppression, like what they call revolutionary violence, justified?
There is no clear-cut answer. We saw change brought about through violence and change brought about through non-violence. Change brought about through non-violence is lasting. Some studies show. We hadn't had war with Britain, for example, because we nurtured, in our case, change was largely brought about by non-violence. Our independence struggle was largely non-violent independence struggle, in the sense that it was not a military victory over British. There has been no war between British and Indians after that. And so that change was long lasting, and we adopted more a democratic system rather than, although partition was an unfortunate aspect of all that, and whether to blame it on non-violence or what. We also saw that change, some studies pointed out, they studied 16 situations, wars, which were where change was brought about through violence. And by and large, except in 4 countries, uh, democracy could not last more than 10 years. We saw the 4 countries: Germany, Japan, I forget the two other countries in which change was brought about through violence, and uh, democracy lasted for more than 10 years. So uh,
Some.
after the so-called revolutionary violence,
Hmm, hmm.
if you come, uh, those revolutionaries who come to power, at times they also tend to continue to use violence to keep their dominance. We saw this in Russia, we saw this in China, uh, and we see this in other countries as well, other situations as well. So, at you know, resistance has to be by and large non-violent, so that everybody, in violent changes, only a very, 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 very tiny section who call themselves as vanguards are able to participate and bring about change. And that change need not be democratic, because it operates secretively. It's cut off from people in variety of ways, and after they come to power, after the revolution, they come to power. This tiny, less than 0.0001% of population who contributed disproportionately towards the change want to reap the benefits of the change that has come, and not necessarily pass on or keep their control over the change that has come in the long run. That's what happened in, this is my personal opinion. So
Just a,
the jury is still out on this.
yeah,
I
I
would say.
just wanted to whether there is one can make a sort of a fine distinction between, say, resistance and state violence. Both may use arms, but one what the state does can be defined as violence, and what the insurgents do can be called as resistance or struggle. In the sense that violence, if we assume that violence is violating the dignity of a human being, so one side is fighting to indignify the other, and the other is fighting for justice and dignity. So can one make that kind of a fine distinction? Like, for example, take the Cuban Revolution. I mean, this is my favorite subject.
Which example? Sorry.
The Cuban Revolution.
Cuban Revolution.
It started as a group of insurgents, and then the whole population joined them. There was a change in power. There was violence after achieving the power, but over a period of time, they have sort of receded. The violent aspect of the revolution has gone down. So in a certain sense, they have been true to what they started with. Unlike many other, you rightly say the Soviet Union doesn't pass that test, or many such revolutions don't. Yeah.
I don't know much about Cuba. Yeah, I don't know much about Cuba, although I know a little bit. Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and
many men of
raving about. Uh, I don't know what the society is there now like, but I did hear, in some international fora where Christians and uh, those who believe in liberation theology, Christians who believe in liberation theology from Cuba, were not very appreciative about the Cuban state. So, sometimes we idolize and idealize in although in violence between state is a greater violation of rights of people than Maoists are. But often the kind of violence that Maoists also inflict on not only on the state and
On
people
square.
who represent state, the security forces, but also on so-called informers whom they believe to be informers,
On
the
sparrow.
brutality, Janta court. They're compelled to use that kind of violence and instill fear in the population so that nobody reports about them, nobody informs about them. They also, in a way, want to keep, I don't know, it's more complex
But wouldn't
than,
wouldn't you agree that there is something, I mean, I'm being a bit provocative, but there is something uh, thrilling about it. Yes, last evening was such a wonderful evening about Ashfaqullah and Ram Kumar Bismil, and they also used
Yeah,
violence.
I can listen.
In a certain sense, there is a
No,
romance.
I think the session is still going. I will ask them to. Yeah,
So
just.
there's a sense of romance about violence also, uh, in certain sense.
but if you see, if you read Bhagat Singh,
Yeah.
later on, Bhagat Singh also writes, and he changed the name of his organization from Hindustan Socialist Republican Army to Hindustan Socialist Republican Association. And somewhere there was a realization, even in Bhagat Singh,
Mm.
although I have great regards for these revolutionaries, regards for these revolutionaries. But were they able to sustain that violence against
Yeah, that's true.
Britishers?
Yeah. Irfan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the other speaker is waiting us on Google Meet. So.
Milind, this is a larger debate.
Yes.
Can go on for hours.
It's an
It's
interesting.
more complex.
Yeah.
We'll carry it on sometime.
Yes, we must.